Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter, and with me today is Courtney Stewart. Courtney, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good, thanks. A little tired. It was a long night last night.
Yeah,
We
I know. And my day my week has been kind of insane. So yeah, I understand.
Oh, sorry to hear. Yeah, we were up till let's see. We were hoping would be done like maybe quarter past 11 p.m. Eastern Standard. Polls would close. We were watching monitoring the midterms, the Super Tuesday for specifically for the Democrats, and it nope. California went long. There was issues in uh, Tennessee with the tornadoes. There was issues in California, and long story short, it took a while before we're all like, okay, that's it. We're calling it. It's 12:30 in the morning. We're all going. So, but I'm here.
Mm.
I'm here. I'm alive, sort of. I'll pretend to be at least. I think we're all a little frazzled. So we are. Let's see. So welcome. This is actually your first. You are the now officially the new co-host. Congratulations.
Yes,
And
yes, I am.
so welcome aboard. And we've got Mikey is going to be maybe tomorrow with a stitch in time. He's got some other obligations, so we don't know if he'll be able to do it. And then on the 10th, we have prison reform with Godless Mom. She's going to be joining us. That's a topic she's talked a lot about. She has done a number of those programs like writing letters to prisoners. She is very passionate
Mm.
about fixing the prison system in the U.S. I have some experience as an observer. We'll get that clear. As an observer, I have experience with the U.S. Don't give me that look. As an observer, I have experience with with the prison system.
Right.
Um, and so we'll be discussing that on the 10th. On the 17th, we will be having the deconversion of Cyrus the Skeptic, who is
Mm.
I love him. He's hilarious. We've had him on before, and he's a really good guy. And I look forward to having him back on. And then the next week after that, we will be discussing the No True Scotsman fallacy. And just as a
Mm.
reminder to people who, we do our best to get, we're simulcasting to Facebook, Periscope, I think one more. I got to write down the list because I always forget. And YouTube, of course. And we try to get all the chats. And if somebody has a question, we do try to do it. We miss a number of questions. Best way to get your questions seen is to give us a super chat. We are 100% viewer supported. So Patreons are also, we have a lot of, we interact with our patrons. We have at least one Patreon hangout every month. We're going to be upping that to two and possibly three with the overtime show. We'll be discussing that some other point. We won't do that today. But we really appreciate all our patrons. So if you want to become a patron or a member, we are also a YouTube partner, so you can become a member of In Time right through your YouTube dashboard. And we appreciate all of it. And the members can also come to the Patreon Hangouts and that's stuff. I don't think you've been to one of those. Those are a lot of fun. And
Mm-mm.
we get we steal lots of. I mean, we get lots of ideas from our patrons for future shows and stuff like that. It's a lot of fun. So I hope you guys will join us. In the meantime, today we are here to discuss the fallout of the impeachment. How much do you know about the impeachment, or how much have you been following that?
Um, I haven't. I don't have a lot of foundational knowledge of how it works in general. I'm kind of too young to have been too closely aware of the past ones. Um, so I don't know. I was born in 1990, so it's kind of a new process to me and my generation, but also very riveting. I don't know. I know the hearings. I think, or not the hearings, but the debates back and forth in Congress were oh so annoying because one side would be living in one reality and the other side would be living in a completely different reality, and based on what they were saying you knew exactly what party they were from and what their concerns were and what their arguments were. And it was just a lot of like grandstanding and honestly gaslighting. creepy. So, let's just deny reality and say, oh, well, this isn't happening. This whole process shouldn't be happening anyway. And like, we're being blocked from this process, and yet they're not. They're creating a narrative that they are, but they're not. And it's just like, ugh, it's so strange.
I think
It's just completely lacking of like integrity.
that's a really good way to put it too. I really like how you put it, which was that um, it really was. It's like two different realities, and I've seen a lot of political discussions and arguments where people have, but in this way, it really was. It was gaslighting. It was. I haven't seen anything like it, and I actually did not follow it very much because I figured after the first few, we usually cover that sort of thing, and we covered a bit in the beginning and in the middle, and then we're like, you know what? No, I think we're done. There isn't. We all
Yeah,
know what's going to happen here. The Mitt Romney vote was about the only one, and we're gonna
yeah.
our guest is going to talk
And
to us. I
it was
suspect about that.
it was a lot of the same arguments over and over again. So if you heard like maybe 10 minutes of it, you basically heard the entire thing. Um, so
Yeah,
the Democratic side sort of did have a lot of different arguments that they brought out and different concerns and things. But from the Republican side, it was just, you know, this is a disgrace. This shouldn't be happening. This is about politics. This is about the election. And, the Democrats have been uh, pushing for this the whole time, and they just created this thing out of nowhere. And what the president did wasn't a crime, and all that. And then, the Democrats are like, this is the moment that we need to stand up and say enough is enough. And even if the president didn't commit a crime, that's separate from whether he's impeachable or not. And so, whether what he did was criminal or not as an individual, it may have been unconstitutional as the president and an abuse of power. And so, there's a lot of things going on that are above my head, but at least that much I seemed to understand pretty well, just from listening to the back and forth and listening to the political commentary on NPR and elsewhere. But it's crazy because again, you have this online and media echo chamber that is created depending on where you live and what you already believe, and it's just made much worse when both sides refuse to live in the same reality. And I don't know if that's more so on the Republican side than the Democratic side. I think probably, but I'm also in my own echo chamber. So I try to be cautious of that dichotomy, being false or true. But it does seem like a blatant disregard for living in reality in the interest of winning the argument and winning the election and winning the day. So it's creepy. It's really creepy because these people, just like journalistic ethics, they have an ethical duty to be representatives of the people, but also to be public servants, and that's supposed to be their role. But it doesn't seem to be. It seems to be political expediency and favors and loyalty above integrity. So.
yeah, that's kind of how it struck me. Well, what I'd like to do, so I think we have today. We've got Landon Nolan, and he's gonna come out and he's gonna talk about this. And I think there are a couple of things that we're gonna cover. He's also he's got, he's been through this process before, so he's got a lot to talk about. And we put some pins in some of this discussion yesterday for stuff we were going to discuss today. But I think there's some very interesting things now that this has happened. The president was successfully impeached. That is a sort of a misunderstanding of how the term is used. He was successfully impeached, which is to say that they did have the trial. It's just that he was
Hmm.
found not guilty of the two charges against him. So now what happens? What happens with the president? He has ostensibly a bit more power now. He seems rather bulletproof. Is he going to spin it? What's he going to do with it? What's going to happen with the Senate? The Senate appears to have really lost any sense of, and were even chastised early in the process by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court for their behavior during this. Is this going to change any of the Senate's rules? How does this influence people's attempt to impeach in the future? And then what happens to the Democrats now who have taken what may or may not have been their best shot, but it's certainly taken a very serious shot at this. There's not much more time before the election. What position are they in, and how does this affect the United States as a whole and our perception in the rest of the world? So with all that having been said, Landon, if we could have you come on out here, Landon, we would love to meet with you and discuss these things. Landon Knoll, how are you?
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your time zone and latitude. And hello from your friendly secular astronomer. It's good to be on the show yet again to talk about impeachment and trials. As Nick alluded to, I'm one of the few people that actually has drafted articles of impeachment, voted on the articles of impeachment, got successful articles of impeachment put through. Then went through an investigation, subpoenaed people, actually participated as one of the people in the trial, and we tried our colleague and found that person guilty by at least a 2/3 margin, and the person was removed from office. So I've done the whole gamut of things at a state level, but this process is really the same. And as Nick pointed to, there's a lot of, I think, misunderstanding about what the process is about, why it's there, what it's for, and what it means. It also, I was listening to your commentary about the process reaction, and reaction is a fairly rational reaction to the process. It's also, I think, a reflection probably that a lot of people saw the impeachment and trial as if it's something to do with the judiciary. And this, I think, is a really key point. It's called a trial, but it has nothing whatsoever to do with the judiciary branch. In fact, had I been a senator, even a Democratic senator, and the Chief Justice, who was merely a presiding officer, had the audacity to lecture the Senate on behavior, I would have gotten up and I would have given that person a lecture, which would have eventually said, "You, sir, are merely the presiding officer. You are not the judge. You are not the jury, and your entire jurisprudence stuff can be tossed out the window because it's not what the Senate does. The Senate is not
all right,
the
so let's
Supreme Court."
just to clarify,
that lecture stuff is kind of like, you don't understand, right?
So he's not. So the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court presides over it, but he is not the judge.
That's correct. The Senate is the judge. In fact, this was actually something that when you had the Clinton trial, that at that time the Chief Justice, who was, actually had the audacity to show up in a set of robes fashioned after Gilbert and Sullivan trial by jury, if you know that comic opera, right? And he was so taken up with the way that's usually done, he actually had his robes with the stripes done in that same sort of fashion. And he tried to play this, I'm the Chief Justice, blah, blah, blah. And essentially that senator actually had I think the integrity to stand up and say no. And in fact, they went through the whole ruling process and came back and said yes. And this is the difference in a trial residing over articles of impeachment in the legislative branch. It is the legislature's rules that apply. And unfortunately, you get lawyers to try to come in with their training and do all this lawyer stuff, right? Which is not necessarily permitted in the legislature. Legislatures behave differently than the court of law, thankfully. And so that particular case, that senator actually pushed it because the justice tried to say, under penalty of blah, 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 you have to be blah, 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 and sit there and said no. And the ruling then at the time, the Senate was, yes, it is true. The legislative body hearing the evidence is both the judge and the jury. And in fact, the way that the rules of who was going to present evidence or who's going to speak and so forth, all the stuff was determined not by the guy up there on the bench pretending to be the leader of the trial, but in fact the Senate. So that's one thing and people sit there and say, is it fair?
Courtney had a question.
They're trying to do the Judge Judy sort of thing as opposed to the Senate process.
So I'm a little lost though. So I don't know too much about this process in general. So maybe I'm just late to the conversation that you guys already went over from last night. But so from what I was referring to of like people arguing against the fact that they should even be there and this should even be happening were senators on the floor that were recognized to speak for a bit and saying, you know, if it was a Democrat, they were like, you know, they were saying how important this process is and that this is the time to make this decision. And then the Republicans were, each one of them were saying, you know, this is a disgrace, this shouldn't be happening. But you're referring to something that was said by a leader of that debate, I guess. I don't really know exactly
before we answer that question, just so we establish just really quickly, we've covered this before, but for people who haven't seen one of our prior shows on this, and what happens is when there's a concern of impeachment, it is the House of Representatives that starts with it, and the judiciary, or not the judiciary, sorry, the judicial committee comes up with, they decide whether or not they believe there has been an impeachable offense. If so, they draft articles of impeachment, they pass it on to the entire House. The House votes on it. If it passes in the House, he is now actually officially impeached. And that is something that people often misunderstand. He is impeached the moment the House passes it. Nancy Pelosi, in this case, held on to those articles of impeachment. There were two articles. The first was obstruction, or the second was obstruction of justice. First was abuse of power. Nancy Pelosi held on to those because she wanted to have some negotiating power with the Senate over how they had the trial. But all impeachment really means is there's going to be a trial. People often think it means he's kicked out of office. No, that's sometimes the result of impeachment, but that's not actually the case. So he is impeached the second the House.
If I could put some minor corrections on there. Just minor corrections. I mean, you're spot on, Nick. But one of the things in particular is the House rules that matter in terms of whether the articles of impeachment. So even though the judiciary might be the place where the articles are drafted, the Ways and Means Committee, basically the House rules determines which committees do what, right? And then if a bill doesn't able to go to the floor except through House procedures. So what really happened was that Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, and the Ways and Means Committee set up the procedure by which a bill could be considered and then debated, and the rules of debate and so forth came about. So you're right. You know, Pelosi also held on to it. There's also some other important processes that occur. That once the legislative body drafts article impeachment and then votes on it, and it succeeds according to the rules of that body, there's then a transmittal that has to go between the people that considered impeachment and the people that perform the trial. In the case of some legislatures have two bodies, like we have in the federal, a House of Representatives and a Senate. Some are unicameral, where it's the same body. And so in that particular case, what would happen is the articles of impeachment are voted on. If they succeed, then the body turns itself into the trial process. In the case of, at the federal level, the House of Representatives had to send a delegation over to the Senate. Now, House rules and Senate rules are different. They're two different bodies. So the House may say, impeachment, let us in. But the Senate, on the other side, has to decide, do we let those people in? Because they're not senators. They don't have the right to come onto the floor. And so the Senate has to agree to even receive them, and then has to agree, yes, we'll hold a trial. So one of the concerns was that the Senate could essentially not receive the members. So the Senate could have refused to let him in. Or the Senate could hear them say, yeah, fine, but we're not going to waste time on a trial. And some of the negotiations behind the scenes would say to do that would be really, really a blatant process. So I just want to clarify that sort of thing.
So one second, I think before we get to the details, we might need to just get the overview skeleton so we know what framework to put it in, because I'm still getting lost. I don't know what that means. Sure. So it's a little over my head. But Lena, so what were you? Go ahead.
So what
okay,
happens
so yeah.
is members
Well,
have some concern.
let's finish the overview real quick. Okay. So the judiciary picks up. They decide that. So not the judiciary. Sorry, the Judiciary Committee in the House of Representatives says we think that there's been an impeachable offense. They kick that up to the entire House. The entire House votes on it. If the House says yes, then you have articles of impeachment, and the president has been impeached. Trump is the third president in history to be impeached. At
Yeah,
that
so point,
I
that's
know there are
confusing
details, but
because
I think
did hear
it's
that.
best to get let's get the 10,000-foot view, and then we can get into the details. But
Yeah.
at the moment that he is impeached, then a trial is to commence. That trial is going to be in the Senate. The senators are both the judge and in that trial. They set the rules. They vote. They decide what the rules are going to be, and then they decide whether he's guilty or not guilty. The president has a defense team that presents the case for why he is not guilty, and the House of Representatives sends over its own team as the prosecution. So the House of Representatives, which has passed the articles of impeachment, say, we think he's guilty, here's why. The president says, no, I'm not, and the Senate listens. The Senate eventually then renders a verdict. He is either guilty or not guilty. If he is guilty, they can do pretty much anything. Well, they can't do anything. They can't throw him in jail. But they can censure him. They can remove him from office. They can do any number of basic things like that. Or they could even say he's guilty, but we're not going to do anything. Or they could find him not guilty, and so that's the process in a nutshell. Does that make sense, Courtney?
So what happened in this case was that it was decided by the House to have the trial, and then that's why people were saying that he's officially impeached.
Yes. Can I correct things?
Yes,
there's some.
Please.
I think you're close, but there's some key things.
There's some detail,
okay.
Of course. Yes.
Let me give it.
I was just trying to get a general understanding.
Foot or 2 kilometer level view of it.
Yes.
Members express concern about a elected official, and in fact, you will hear the legislative body will express concern, and over the years you'll hear about people calling for impeachment of blah blah blah. And by the way, not just the president, but judges can be impeached. And members of the cabinet can be impeached. I mean, there's a lot of people that can be impeached. But someone calls up, but the body has to some point say either no, that's just rhetoric, or yes, we'll entertain and consider articles of impeachment. And so through their rules, they draft articles of impeachment. The rules, if the bill goes to the floor of the body and they vote yes, then the person is impeached. But that's like the district attorney indicting someone, right? They're not guilty or innocent. They're indicting someone for that. So it's like being indicted by a grand jury. And oftentimes the testimony is actually, some of it's held in private and secret. Why? Because if you are innocent of impeachment charges, you don't want all that stuff being broadcast unfairly. So oftentimes the process is internal, but at some point they say, there looks like there's smoke here, let's have it a vote. And if it passes, you are impeached. At that point, the body transmits the impeachment article to the body that can consider a trial. And here's a very, very key point. What are they trying? They're actually trying the person's ability to hold office. So guilty means you lose your office. Innocent means you retain your office. That's all that happens, right? So if Trump had been found guilty by the rules of the Senate, Trump would at that point no longer be president. Now, because this is a legislative body, it means that the courts could turn around and now haul him into court and sue him and put him on trial, that sort of process, right? There's a reason why the courts can't just decide we're going to arrest the president or we're going to arrest this member of Congress, right? Because they have immunity. And this goes back to English common law. We can talk about why it is, but But the framers of the Constitution said, we do not want the president to be able to arrest people he doesn't like. We don't want the judges arresting people they don't like. But on the other hand, they can't just be able to do anything. So they created this process by which your ability to hold office is impeached, right? Meaning that the body says, yes, we're going to now consider whether or not you should continue in office. The trial says, do you remain in office? So if the Senate had voted yes at the 2/3 level required, Trump would have instantly be non-president, right? Then the line of succession would happen and Pence would have become vice president to become president of this process. But that's what the Senate trial does. It says, shall you remain in office? Guilty means no, you're gone. Now, by the way, let's say that the Senate had removed Trump from office. Then Trump is then subjected to civil and criminal prosecution, right? And that's not double jeopardy, right? If a judge or a cabinet officer or a president or a member of the legislature is found guilty, all they're guilty of is saying you can't be in office anymore, and whatever immunity you have is vaporized. And therefore, if you've done anything criminal or there's civil penalties, you're like any other citizen, and you're now subject to the courts. Does that make sense? That some member says, I think there's a problem with this person holding office. The body says, okay, in our rules, we'll consider that. Articles are drafted. The rules say, here's how it goes to the floor. The floor body votes on it. Majority says, yep, this person's ability is impeached, but not removed. So then it goes to the people who hold the trial. That's the transmittal. They receive it. They hold the trial. The people who hold the trial are the judges and the jury. The judges determine how the trial is going to proceed, and the jury of whether the person stays in office or not. Guilty, which usually means 2/3, you're removed from office, and that's all that happens. Innocent means you retain your office. That's really what's at stake.
Does that also mean that he can no longer run for president after that, or is he still running for president?
That's an interesting constitutional question. If you've been removed from office, we faced that in our case, where the person who had been removed as mayor ran again, and there was consideration of whether or not that's allowed, right? Because and that's an open question, right? But effectively, when the person ran again, they only got 20. The people said no. We're allowed back into the office, thankfully. But yes, that's a good question. What if you have been impeached or removed from office? What happens? And that's a constitutional question, which would probably mean the courts would have to rule on it.
But that does seem to mean that, like, the impeachment itself is basically being reversed or made ineffective, because the impeachment is whether we should go to trial. The trial decides what will happen, but then now that where the trial is, sorry.
So the trial is whether the person stays in office.
But what I'm saying is that the reason for the impeachment is whether this person is fit to be there or not, and
so questions about
the trial decides whether.
Yes.
Sorry.
You're right. I'm agreeing with you.
Okay, I couldn't hear you. So I guess.
Remember, the trial is about whether they.
Well, if the question is, I mean, the Constitution, to the best of my knowledge, does not prohibit them seeking re-election and being re-elected. And I think part of the thinking behind that is if the voters in their infinite wisdom want to give this person another shot, then they get another shot. The reason that they're unfit to hold office is for an individual, specific act. It doesn't mean so if you speed in your car, get pulled over, they don't say, okay, that's it, you're never allowed to drive again because you might speed again. Right. No, if you lose your license, you can get your license back. Yeah.
a different election means a different term, right? So
Mhm.
you know, if you hold terms of office, each term is its own special thing, right? So your
Right.
franchise to hold office is a process of voting and that sort of thing. So it's true. Had Nixon been impeached and tried and found guilty and removed, in theory, Nixon could have had the audacity to try to run again. Whether or not he would have survived that is another question. But you're
Well, so
right.
let
So,
Technically, it's only your term is being impeached, and your ability
right,
to
right.
hold that term
So, right. So whether
pre-removal
or
from
not
office.
whether or not the offense happened or not is at the impeachment stage, not the trial stage.
Well, whether or not there is cause to hold a trial, but again,
Right.
there's kind of an analog in the judicial process, which is the district attorney makes a case to a grand jury saying so and so is doing, let's say, embezzling, and the grand jury hears secret testimony, considers stuff, and either says yeah or no. Right? If the grand jury tells them saying no, we don't see the person is not indicted. But if they are indicted, then the district attorney might turn around and say, okay, let's actually have this person brought to trial, charged, that sort of thing, and then the trial
Yeah.
occurs and penalties go forth. But
Because
in the case of the
I guess what
legislature,
was confusing, oh, go ahead.
go ahead.
Well, so what I listened to was live coverage on NPR of I guess the impeachment process, I guess you would call it, instead of the trial. It was before the trial, I think. Or it
Yeah,
might have been
so
the trial, I don't
so
no.
so
know.
the House had
Um,
hearings,
so
right?
yeah, so
There-
they were going back and forth and speaking, being given time to speak and yielding their time and all that those things. So from what I understood is that one side was saying that this process is necessary, that the things that Trump did are things that he did really do, and that, this is being denied by the other side, and they're, offended by their colleagues. And then the Republican side was saying, well, we're offended by our colleagues because this is all a sham. He didn't do any of this. They're living in different realities. So what I'm confused about is, how is it allowed that this process can be in two different realities, where the government has the resources and the access and the ability to get at the bottom of this, get to the truth of it? What process, which process? Is it the trial, where we are able to say, yes, this happened, or no, it didn't, and yes, this process is necessary, and no, it isn't? Or is there no process for that?
well, so a coupling again. Great questions, right? Really, really great questions, and it shows you're really considering this thing. So congratulations on the great questions.
Yeah.
Let me posit some answers. One of the things, and again, in impeachment processes, we have to look at case history, right? We don't have the nice, clean court records about things. We have essentially what the legislative body has done in the various impeachments processes
Mm-hmm.
that went forward.
The precedent, yeah.
One thing very particular and precedent we had was when Richard Nixon, the House was considering articles of impeachment. It was Gerald Ford as a senator that essentially stated and was affirmed that the impeachment process is a political process. By political, I mean it's how, just like how bills are performed, how debate is done in a legislative body. It's a legislative politics process. And you're right in saying, well, this side said yeah this, and the other said no that. But that is also what happens if you have a bill that's going to consider regulating the size of oranges that can be sold in the open market. And you got these people over here saying we need this bill, blah blah blah. These people saying no, it's terrible, it's an infringement on blah blah blah. And just like any other bill in the legislature, you have debate. You have a process that says, because in the legislature, you can't have just anyone showing up and saying, we are going to vote on this bill. And the people there say, yeah, and then it's a bill. Like, no, that's not what happens. Each body has a process by which someone can say, I think this should be done. And the body says, yeah, we'll entertain that, or no, we don't. What happened was a bunch of people called upon the House to consider impeaching the president because of certain acts. The body finally said, okay, we'll entertain it. And as Nick said, the Judiciary Committee was one of the places that looked at issues. And it turned out through the House rules that the way the committee says, if you vote to draft articles, they can come to the floor and be voted on by the entire House, right? But again, that's
You're
all
going over my head again, I don't know what you're saying.
Here's actually what I'd like to do. Well, hold on a sec, because what I'd actually like to do, we did cover a lot of this in our show on what impeachment is and how it works. So we actually have and we had Landon on for that, and that was an hour show. What I'd like to try to do today is, and I hope we've covered enough that our audience can understand the basics of how it works. There are some questions we covered that, and we can have another show on it, but I would like to discuss a bit more what are the consequences of how this has happened now, because the impeachment did attempt, it was a power play by the Democrats to remove the president. It failed, and it has had some rather significant consequences for all parties involved. So I would like to.
Yeah. So this, and Nick is right. Nick is saying this is a political process, right? And what was being discussed was, well, how dare politicians be politicians? And guess what? When they debate treaties, when they debate stuff. So the question is, what are the implications of this debate? Because when you have legislation and you set precedents, it has impact down the road, right? In terms of stuff. And you say, well, politicians were playing politics. Well, guess what? That's what politicians do. That's office politics is what they do. That's their product, right? And so you saw, just like any other debate over whether this treaty be upheld, the question is, okay, we had a debate. What's the long-term consequences? Because you establish precedent and you make it easier for itself. So something like NAFTA passing makes it easier in the future to amend and consider trade issues in North America, as an example. So you had this impeachment process, which did not end in the removal of the president, but it has implications of going forward. Again, it's a political process.
So does the in the impeachment process at the federal level or at the state level, is it usually this divided in reality of like this happened, no, this didn't happen? Like, is this an unprecedented level of denial, or is it something that is just their job that they do?
I think it's something in their job they do, because if you look at the history of impeachments, and again, and their implications, you have a set of stuff where there's just a couple of people that say impeach, and the body says, we have other things to do. Others say impeach, and say, okay, maybe, and they look and say, is that all you got? No, we're not going to consider articles of impeachment. They fail. Other things happen where they say, yeah, okay, there's enough that we could have a trial, because again, you're not saying guilty, but maybe there's enough stuff we should consider. And then the person gets, and in the trials, in the history of impeachment at the federal level, there's been trials where it's been near unanimous, or unanimous, right? There's been trials where it got close, like Andrew Johnson, the first president to be impeached, had a trial and he missed being removed by one vote, right? And that was a senator who was on the Republican side.
Right, but the Republican side was saying that it is impeachable that the Democrats have done this, that this wasn't supposed to happen because this isn't founded. So is that,
I think
accusation usually thrown around? Like, So,
Yeah,
and that's what I'm trying to answer, is that like this
if you have a
seemed like such a circus this time, that like I don't know if it's usually this insane and usually this confusing as to what's real, what isn't, who's right, who's wrong, because it's so divided in the reality of what's going on that I just don't know if like that's business as usual, because I've never been around for an impeachment process. And so I'm confused as to how this happened.
Great question again.
That might be
Let me
another
get
talk.
back to Nick's thing about what the consequences of it. I mean, one of the previous trials in the Senate was of a federal judge actually in Louisiana, I believe. And I believe the Senate voted 97-3 to convict. And I think the Senate trial occurred like 2 or 3 hours. Like the person was as guilty as hell. And and I think why the 3 people voted yes is beyond them. Like they didn't, who knows? I'm not sure why they did it, but there's been stuff where it's been near unanimous. And it went through and they just said, yeah, guilty, bounce, right? There's other ones where it's been contentious, and we've had contention for the impeachment of Bill Clinton. We had contention the treatment of Donald Trump. Now, you're saying the history of stuff with Richard Nixon. Nixon resigned. He resigned because the House the next day was going to vote on articles of impeachment, and a delegation from the Senate basically marched in the White House, told the Secret Service, we're going in and talking to the president, barged in, and it was 3 senators who essentially said to Nixon, Mr. President, we have determined there's at least 97 members of the 100th Senate who will vote to convict you. And by the way, we're not the 3 who say we won't, right? They said essentially, and it might have been the case of had Nixon's impeachment gone to trial, you would probably had a near unanimous verdict from the Senate in that particular case. So it depends, right? In the case of Clinton and Trump, it was contentious. Now, what happens in the legislature when there's a bill being considered? This side says, this is a great thing, since sliced bread, you got to do it, mother apple pie. The other side says, no, this will be terrible, the skies will fall down. And so you have all this political hyperbolic stuff, right?
Right.
But guess what? That's what happens if they're debating a bill on funding the Weather Bureau or stuff.
Right.
I'm not excusing. I'm just saying that's the way it happens.
Yeah.
So now, what's going to happen in the future? And the question is, okay, given this happened, what might we see? So I'm going to give a guess that one of the things that happens is that when the Republicans get control of the House of Representatives in the future, it'll happen, and there's a Democratic president, they might try to give revenge by finding some way to impeach that president. And some say the Democrats did this because the Republicans did this to Clinton. That's debatable, but that may be one of the things is it's going to become easier for when the House of Representatives is dominated by a different party than the presidency, you might see a bigger trend towards impeaching.
So you do usually see this rhetoric of denying that this really happened and telling the public, no, that they're lying, this isn't true?
I'm not sure that's not what happened in the Clinton. The Clinton one was, I mean, the Clinton one, I think most of the facts were agreed upon. The interpretation of the word wasn't necessarily agreed upon, but I think most of the people agreed on the basic facts. I do think this was a level of gaslighting I've never seen or heard of before. This struck me as something pretty new. I think it's solely the result of Mitch McConnell, who did roughly the same thing with Obama's judicial nomination as well, which was sort of really change what the reality is.
And I understand. I'm not defending one side or the other. I'm just saying that.
Well, and that's really what I was trying to ask is this an unprecedented level of gaslighting? Because it seemed to be. And honestly, I would hope that it's new, because I would hope that this isn't the way it's always been. But it was truly, truly frightening and scary to me. Like I was like, what is going on?
It's called Mitch McConnell. That's the name of.
But understand, it seems to be like it's never been worse. But I can bring you back to the days of the filibusters of people like Strom Thurmond trying to get something like the Voting Rights Act passed. I can bring you back to the pre-Civil War days where people were actually physically assaulting each other in the body, right? We've had cases where it has been extraordinarily bad in the House of Representatives and in the Senate.
But
I'm not excusing it. I'm just saying
the Clinton one
today.
So what?
But
yeah,
I can point you back.
So from right, yeah. So but that's the point though. Is that from what I understand about the Clinton one? Again, I wasn't around for it, and I don't know too much about it. But that seemed to be much more politically driven than anything else. But it was done because of politics more so than Clinton actually doing a whole lot wrong. But and I don't know if that's true, but this seems to be the opposite. This seemed to be something that was overwhelmingly necessary, and then it was being played by the other side as if it was just another kind of political move that's not necessary. Is that the case?
You are correct. And I will again will come back and say that impeachment is a political process.
Right.
Just like selection of the Speaker of the House.
But brought up for political motivations only, meaning. So like I get that it's a political process, but the reason it's right. But the reason that impeachment is there in the first place is to protect the people from a basically tyrannical person being in office that's going to abuse their power and things like that. So I don't, from what I understand, the Clinton administration one wasn't that, but this seems to be.
So impeachment is there because we give limited immunity to people in government to prevent a tyrannical judge or a tyrannical police force from arresting people. Imagine if Trump could go and arrest any person he didn't like for saying mean things about him, right? And having judges who will sit there and say, yeah, throw those people in jail, right? So impeachment is there to protect the members of office. You know, that the reason why they have to be impeached is because they're protected from being arrested in carrying out their duties. But the problem is, if you did that, if you said you can't be arrested, then people could do all kinds of crazy stuff, right? Yeah. And again, we've had vice presidents commit murder and flee out in the countryside for that sort of thing. We've had some really wacky stuff happen. But here's the thing: is that so impeachment is there because they didn't want to give absolute immunity to office holders. They want to have a process by which they could be removed. And how is that done? By saying, well, their ability to hold office needs to be impeached, impaired. And then there's a trial. And if they find that the reasons are sufficient to remove from office, they're bounced. By the way, the reasons, and it's trick, you can be removed. They could have said, we do not like Trump's hair. Impeach him because he has bad hair. And the Senate, 2/3 says, yep, bad hair, gone, right? You do not have to be impeached for something that is a specific crime. So this gaslighting, like, there's no crime. No, it's up to the Senate to decide, does he hold office? So the consequences of what happens, I think, going forward are several. One of them is that I think you will see, you could see that when the Republicans at some point in the future gain control of the House and there's a Democratic president, that they may try to find some reason to impeach that president. Another thing is that you might find that there is a counter to that, to say, you've got a president who's done something seriously wrong, and people say, it's too much of a bother to remove him. Let's just wait until the next election. right? That's the other possibility. I claim that sort of there's two fronts that could be done. Either the other side gets revenge, or it might be that you have a president that does something even more serious, and there is reluctance to impeach him and try him. So imagine Trump gets reelected.
Mm-hmm.
The claims about what Trump has done is not limited to those two articles. Right? It's kind of shocking that the two articles that they picked were the articles they picked. I mean, I thought that what the House should have done is said, okay, we have these two articles, but there's other issues. Let's let them play out and add to it. But they went forward with those two articles. Understand that Trump could be impeached again. There's no double jeopardy. So it's possible the House could get together and do a rapid impeachment and force over the Senate, and the Senate could consider, and he could be tried again, even in this term. It's possible. But the question is, next term, let's say Trump gets reelected. Let's say the House is held by the Democrats again. Would, for example, and let's say that Trump's tax returns gets revealed and he finds he's got tax fraud, actual illegal tax fraud. Would the House go through the process of trying to impeach the president again? Given the blowback, all the political shenanigans that came from it, would they be too weary and let Trump slide?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think that's one of my questions. What has some of the blowback been from the failure to successfully get him removed from office? And then we actually have two super chats. You can answer that, and I can hit those, or do you want to? What do you want to?
So I think one of the things is that we'll see in the upcoming election, beginning in November, as to whether or not people will be the ability to hold office will be impacted. Will people like Kevin Nunes will they use his performance in the House against him, and will the voters kick him out? Will Trump be reelected or not? Will people like Mitch McConnell hold office? Now, if they succeed, understand that if Mitch McConnell gets reelected, you can't say, well, then therefore what he did in the Senate was right. A person running for office gets considered by the whole entirety of who they are and what they're going to do and what they might do. But Nick is right. Is it possible that some office members will be impacted by their ability to get reelected, either for or against?
Well, so yeah, so now the Republicans, many people had actually. Let me rephrase this. Has this galvanized voters to vote for Trump now that he has been acquitted, and saying that in fact the Democrats should never have brought the charges and that this was all political now after the fact, that this has painted that narrative?
We have to distinguish people who are already Trump supporters. You're not converting them. I think that the undecided, at best, were just disgusted by the political process. And I don't think the undecided is going to sit there and say, yes, it was unfair and blah, blah, blah. I think they might say a pox on both their houses type of thing. That's one possibility. It might reduce. Other possibility is very specific people who are really wacky in the whole process, that it'll become an election issue on what they did, which is actually proper. That's what election's about, is if someone's getting reelected, they have to run on their record. This is part of their record. So I think it's actually
this show, real quick, this show In Time, I know that it sort of tries to stay within the realm of reality. It tries to educate. And so I think the bottom line,
I
yeah, the bottom line that I think is so confusing for most people about this process is that you have such a different narrative coming from either side of the reality of what happened, why it happened, and whose fault it was, and who should be charged with their own trial for how they acted and all of that. both sides are saying the same exact thing about the opposite side for different reasons. So
Yeah.
I think I would just like to try and understand for the viewers and for myself what is the case about this process. Was it just botched but should have happened, or was it something that is only political and shouldn't have happened? Like, is it unfounded, or is it something that should have happened but was handled badly? Or was it handled as well as it could be, and it's just the narrative is that it was botched? You know, does that make sense? Like, there's a lot of different narratives out there.
Great.
So
By the way, great,
I'm trying to
great
understand
question.
it.
Great question.
Thank you.
Nick, you want to go first, or I can also have a response on that?
Yeah, let's give Nick a minute here.
In my view, actually, I'll stay out. I'll stay out of my view. We'll let Landon go, and then we have 2 super chats that I'll hit.
Okay. I mean, so as I saw the process unfold, I did not see any procedural rules violated. Now, you might not say that it's fair, or that they could have done. For example, I think the Senate refusing to let people give evidence was a bad political move. Mm-hmm. However, the Senate didn't violate its rules. The Senate said, here's the rules on the trial, and the majority can decide, and the majority said no. Right? You don't like it, maybe, or you do, depending on what side you're on. But so I didn't see any rules being violated in the process. Now, question is, was it smart politics? Right?
But which side made that decision? Real quick.
Which side made a decision of not to have any evidence, any testimony in the Senate trial?
Okay, yeah.
The vote was along party lines, and I believe all the Republican senators said, nope, we're not interested in having anyone testify.
Okay, so the Republicans decided to not have evidence brought, not have testimony brought. I remember hearing that, but again, we're living in a reality where whatever we hear from the media, we have no idea if it's true or not. So
but understand,
trying to get to the bottom of it.
Actually, what happened is the Senate rules for the trial says the majority gets to decide what the rules are. Because remember, they're the judge.
Right.
And they're the jury. So as judges, they said, here's how the trial is going to proceed. Because example, in a criminal court, the judge can decide, is this evidence relevant? Is this person even going to be allowed to be a witness, right? And that's what the Senate sort of did, was that said, the Senate as a majority. Now, it turned out a vote to bring forth evidence in terms of testimony by witnesses was a partisan vote, and I understand that the when it came time to say, can we call this person as a witness, that person a witness, and they were talking about even calling Biden's son as a witness, and people say, well, we're going to want to call this person a witness, and the senators as a majority along party lines said, no, we're not going to have anyone coming in and giving as witnesses. We're only going to allow the House members to do the prosecution and the president's defense to respond. And they basically said, here's how many hours you have to debate. And here's when you're going to debate. And so it's time limited, and that was it. And they said, no, we're not going to proceed any further. Now, to be fair, some Republican senators said, one of the reasons why we didn't want to have any witnesses is that our minds are made up. It was pretty clear he wasn't going to be convicted. So they said, why bring forth evidence, right? Because again, it's you say, well, in a court, that seems to be terrible. How can you have a trial without? But it's not a judicial trial. It's a political process. I'm not excusing it. I just think that's what happened.
Right.
So
no, I
was
understand.
it a bad move?
So
probably.
Okay, yeah, you were getting to that, right? You said that it was a bad move.
Yeah, because I think if I were trying to make the Republican senators look more fair, then I would have said, all right, Democrats, you can call a witness as long as we can call another witness. And your witness can appear at 3 a.m. and ours can appear at 8 o'clock in prime time. They can do stuff like that. Because again,
Okay.
in some way, the trial, they were playing to the voters, right? They're pandering to the voters. But guess what? When you see people coming on the floor of the Senate or the House, often they're not there to try to have this reasoned debate. They're there to pontificate on behalf of their people who want to vote for them again.
Yeah, and that was made very, very clear in the coverage of that, of what
But
people
just
did.
watch.
So can I ask real quick?
Segment.
Good. Yeah. So can I? So that footage, or well, the audio that was taken from C-SPAN, I guess, of that, was that the Senate part that was from, of the minutes?
There was previous times of the House, the debate when the impeachment articles went to the floor of the House. That was all on there. The committees drafting it, the Republicans and Democrats yammering back and forth. All this stuff happens. But guess what? And this is an important thing. If you have a bill that is going to regulate immigration, you'll have committee hearings, and C-SPAN will give you hours and hours of this stuff. And if it gets to the floor because of the rules, you hear more and more debate on things. Well,
but I was just trying to figure out which one I was listening to at the time.
Yeah.
That was the Senate, right?
In the end, it was the Senate. That was doing the trial. That was sort of a dramatic thing. But again,
but NPR was doing something live.
If you had watched the impeachment of the Louisiana judge, you would have probably missed it, because it was like the trial was over in a matter of people said, guilty as hell. Do we need any more evidence? No. Bang, out, right? That was a whole different process.
Okay. For the audience to understand the whole process, what I was referring to of the back and forth of like, we live in different realities and gaslighting, that was the Senate talking, right?
Yes. But understand, you would have found the same level of gaslighting when House members were saying, we need a impeachment precedent. No, we don't.
Right.
And then they started having committee hearings, and you had that same level of stuff happening there. Yeah. And then the debate over the article of impeachment. That political process was there unfortunately from start to finish. So the implications
I was just trying to understand which I was listening to.
The next time it happens, one of the risks is that it's going to be, but one risk is it might be easier for the other side to get revenge. The other risk is that you find there's an office holder who really does need to be removed, and people say, I don't know if we want to go through this process that didn't work so well for me, right? And believe me, senators and House of Representative people, they're doing polling, they're looking at the implications, how to respond. The opposition is going to use it against them, or in the elections, and the voters have to ultimately decide.
So there seems like there's no like check and balance for this process as a whole to be anything other than politically motivated on both sides, because it is a political process. I understand that, but like the original purpose of impeachment is to protect the people from a tyrant staying in office when they shouldn't be. So it seems like this process, for all its complexities, is no longer that, because it's not for the people anymore, right?
The reason why they have to impeach is because office holders hold limited immunity.
No, I know. You mentioned that.
But there's another thing that also has to do with this person, Anglican Church, right? How do we get there? How do we get this process in the first place? One of the things that go back to is something like the Act of Supremacy of 1558, that Elizabeth I established the Anglican Church, the Church of England, as the official church. Henry VIII put it forward. Bloody Mary, Queen Mary flipped it back to Catholic, and then Elizabeth I submitted it as Church of England.
Mm-hmm.
You say, okay, that's their political process, but understand, in Parliament at the time, that act was passed with only 17% of the members present. I say, how could that be? Where were the other 83% of the members of Parliament in some of this one of the most fundamental acts that changed the course of England? The answer was they were in hiding or arrested. The game that was played in Parliament at the time was, if you thought you had a close vote, you went out and detained, arrested, shanghaied, kidnapped the other opposite members. Remember, and as wacky as it is in British Parliament, it's the members go out into the lobby where the lobbyists lobby them, and they pass through one of two doors, yes or no, and that's how they vote. So if you can arrest and detain members of Parliament, keep them from going through those doors, they don't vote. And
is that why they're called lobbyists?
Yes.
That's so cool. I'm sorry. I'm just so excited about that. They're called lobbyists because they do their work in the lobby of the. Okay, that's so cool. Yes. I'm sorry. I'm nerding out. Yes. Go ahead.
And of course, you get to be a lobbyist. Get to be a member. Members can lobby, but they also have other people come in and cajole and they threaten and there's all kinds of crazy stuff happens behind the speaker doors where the members go through. All kinds of shenanigans happen in that process, right? But here's the thing: at that time, if you thought you had a close vote, you could try to arrest members, get them drunk,
right?
Get them, kidnapped, so forth. It was
give them opera tickets, apparently. Yeah. Yes. I've seen that in movies. Like give them opera tickets and other places to be.
So the Act of Supremacy of 1558, that was Queen Elizabeth, during Queen Elizabeth's reign, when they established the Anglican Church, that act was passed by only 4 votes. So 83% of Parliament was detained, arrested, staying away, afraid. Only 17% actually showed up in the lobby, and they barely got that act passed. Now, in modern days,
so are you saying that this process has never represented the people? Is that what you're saying? In any country? Because it seems like that's what you're getting at.
With a monarchy, there isn't any people stuff there.
Right.
And the Parliament was essentially elite noble people who didn't get to be part of the House of Lords and all that crazy stuff. Yeah, and by the way, in the U.S., our House of Representatives is like Parliament, House of Commons, and our Senate is like the House of Lords, right? But one of the things that when they were drafting our articles of Confederation and later on drafting our Constitution, they said a couple of things. They said, first of all, we can't have the president acting like a king, arresting people he doesn't like. But on the other hand, we can't have office holders be immune from everything. So we're going to have this process where you can't be arrested in the process of conducting your official duty, but you could be impeached by your peers and then tried by your peers, and if found guilty, removed from office, and now you're subject to the law in full and so forth. That's why. Also, quorums, right? The fact that they could pass this act to create the Church of England officially, renouncing Queen Mary's stuff, by only 17% is just like so. So the bodies were also allowed to say, here's when it is okay to do something. Here's when you have enough members to constitute a quorum. Now, it doesn't prevent them from being politicians. I mean, guess what? That's what they are. And it's sad to say that the public, I have to say the public is shocked by what happened, let's say, on the floor of the House for debating articles or the Senate trial. Yes. Guess what? watch what a bill might happen with regards to immigration
Right.
or a bill regarding healthcare. You want to see crazy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It makes the Senate trial look pretty tame, right? Unfortunately.
Yes.
That's
well, and that's,
and
I think
who's to
that's what's
blame?
shocking to me though, is the, like, the bills, yeah, people are going to come out and say, you know, oh, this is going to create this problem, oh, this is going to save the world, and like you deal in different realities, and I understand that, but it's also like maybe it's just because of like social media creating this echo chamber of like nobody's living in the same reality. But it seems like there was a point in American history where, you know, you had like the nightly news that was supposed to have all this integrity, and everybody, you know, worked from the same script of reality. They worked from the same news of like, this is what happened, this is how it's framed, and we're all agreed in the entire country that this is what's going on. But I think
Yeah.
that, you know, maybe it's just a next level fuel for gaslighting in the Senate and the House, because of this echo chamber of news and understanding of what happened and what didn't. Because again, we walk away from this like trial of the impeachment, everyone is saying completely different things, and sometimes batshit crazy things, and it's like,
Yeah.
you know, again,
But to be fair, for elections, a president gets elected, says, I have a mandate of the people. The other side said, no, blah, 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 blah. It's unfortunate. The responsibility ultimately lies with the citizens. First, for those who do not vote. And again, Nick has heard me have very harsh words. If you are an American citizen and you're not registered to vote,
we're not going to get back
shame
into the
on you.
demonetization of yesterday on that one.
But the point is that ultimately it's the people that are responsible, right?
mm-hmm.
The citizens get the legislators they deserve. They get the president they deserve, unfortunately. But you're right. This notion of social media has sort of changed the way that stuff is debated. But to be fair, and you know, I loathe President Nixon, but if you were President Nixon or James Ehrlichman or Mitchell's or so forth, or Haldeman or those people, they would have said the NBC Nightly News and Woodward and Bernstein and all this stuff were out to get them, right? And we're creating this false narrative. They would have denied it, even if they didn't believe it. Right?
Yeah.
That's unfortunate. So what are the consequences of this Trump impeachment? One possibility is the other side might be emboldened to get revenge. The other possibility is that we'll have something which is even more serious, and the members will be reluctant to do it again. Again, imagine Trump is reelected and the House is held by the Democrats. And we then find Trump is doing things that are, you know, tax fraud or cheating on real estate stuff or whatever the deal is, right? Do you think the Democrats say, that's the first thing we're going to do is let's go and impeach the president again? People are going to be, it's going to be harder for them, I think, to do that. So unfortunately, one of the consequences of, I think, the Clinton impeachment and the Trump impeachment is that it might make it harder to have a real case.
So we have a super chat, and we're going to get to that in just a second. But real quick, just from what you just said, it does rest on the voters, the responsibility. What's the problem is that the voters aren't given a fair opportunity to be dealing with reality. They're being given a version of reality that isn't the case, and so their hands are tied to make a sound decision if they're not given the tools to do that. And that's what's really scary about social media in general, but the gaslighting. Like, I feel like there is a huge problem that in this process, politicians are allowed to do this level of denial and propaganda and gaslighting, because it's very much that, and it's clear that it's that, and everybody agrees that it's that, but nobody says, how can we make this not the case? It's scary. But super chat time.
You raise an extraordinarily important point. Thomas Jefferson pushed for free public education for literacy because Thomas Jefferson recognized that an illiterate voting public is at a disadvantage and that they could be spoon-fed all kinds of stuff, and that so he pushed for this universal education, free education, not simply if you're rich enough to have your children tutored by the right people, but
Right.
free and compulsory public education. And his reasoning was exactly as you said, if they're not even able to be literate, if they can't find the information, how are they supposed to make an informed choice? And unfortunately, we have things like the Electoral College, these breaks in the process because they say, well, if you have this uninformed public who do crazy stuff, we've got to stop them. So, for example, originally the senators were not elected by the people. They were selected by legislatures in the original Constitution, and stuff like that. So there was this fear by our founding fathers, some of our founding fathers, that if you let the populace do anything, they can run amok and you get all kinds of crazy stuff. Right?
Yeah, and I think that is the reality that we live in now, though, because
yes, and that's
yes, people are literate, but what they're reading is, unbeknownst to them, completely unreal, and that's what's, and I count myself in that as well. It's impossible to be sure that you're not doing that.
To keep tabs of what your government's doing. But when you cast votes, part of what you're supposed to do is sit there and say, should this person be office? Should this person be office instead? What are they saying? It's a burden when someone's trying to just pay the rent.
Yeah.
I understand. And this is part of the problem of democracy. Now, our friends over in the House of Commons might say, well, this is why members of parliament are elected to do the best for the constituency. So in England, they say that the MP's job is to do the right thing for their constituents, not to do what the constituents tell them to. And is that better? Right? It's I don't know, but you've raised.
Well, but that's what the Senate is supposed to be, right? Like, because that the House is elected. I might be getting this backwards, but I think the House is elected every 2 years, Senate's elected every 4 years, and there's more of the House than the Senate. So the House is supposed to be more of a representative of the public opinion. The House is supposed to be more representative of the public opinion by trying to get reelected more often, and the Senate is supposed to be more removed from public opinion. And
entire House
get at what their real interest is versus their. Sorry, go ahead.
So the entire House is elected every 2 years.
Yeah.
The senators serve for 6 years, and there's 1/3 gets elected each time. And the Senate's supposed to be the ones that puts the brakes on stuff that the House can do crazy things. So, but on the other hand, the rules, if you look at how the House operates, there's 435 people in the House, and they can't let anyone do anything. So there's very restricted rules of when you are a House of Representatives, you'll be told by your majority whip or minority whip, you have 3 minutes to speak, right? And that's a generous amount of time. And you better not use it all because we want reserve some time for so-and-so, right? That's the case of the House. In the case of the Senate, anyone can gain control of the floor and talk for hours at a time. And it takes 60 votes to sit there and say, let's stop debate, this whole filibuster thing. So there's very different processes. You have the same thing in the House of Commons, House of Lords. But again, that's why they said the Senate is more supposed to be more reasoned, more calm, more considerate of stuff, where the House has all kinds of great things happen. So that's why they said, let the House be the people who can impeach. Let the senators be the thing above. And remember also, our founding fathers originally said that senators were selected by the states. The state legislatures appointed the senators. People weren't, the olden days, people didn't get to vote for the senators. Just like the House of Lords.
The idea was that they wouldn't be beholden to public opinion, but they would be able to rise above it and do what they think is actually best for the people, whether the people think that's the case or not. And so that's what the Senate is still supposed to be versus the House.
Yes, and you could judge whether or not that happens. So was it
Yeah.
smart for the Democrats to impeach Trump? I think that's debatable. I think the two articles they picked were not politically savvy selections. Was it smart for the Republicans to block testimony? If I had been counseling them, I would have said, "Hey, you're going to find the president innocent anyway. Let them put forward their things so they can't say there was this process involved, and then you could call your witnesses. They call their witnesses, and you could sit there and play Scrabble. And because if you had times where you watched the Senate trial." You found members sitting there playing board games and just kicking back and ignoring. They had to be there, but they had no intention of listening.
So,
Well,
Nick, we've got a super chat. You said, right?
Yeah, we got a super chat. So let me get to the super chat, and then we're probably going to have to start wrapping this up. So super chat. We actually have several $2 super chats. One from Red. Will the acquittal change the way people vote? We already actually covered that. Another $2 super chat. Seems some voters will be swayed towards Trump. And then the final $2 super chat. Oh, this is a nice one. Love Landon, love Courtney. Hi, Nick.
I think Courtney has been asking some fantastic questions on there. So congratulations, Courtney, for great questions.
It's because I'm trying to understand and I do think about it, but I don't have a lot of. I don't usually come on YouTube and talk about politics. I talk about psychology and religion. So I'm new to this, and I'm kind of revealing my very lack of expertise in this. But I do understand the right question, so that's good.
You do an excellent job of asking questions. Understand as well, I'm not trying to defend what happens. I'm trying to be impartial on that. But I think the Democrats could have been more politically savvy in their impeachment process. I think the Republican senators could have been more savvy because I think it's going to have negative impact on certain senators getting reelected. And by the way, a senator might get reelected, but if they get reelected by a very narrow margin, that has an impact on how they behave. Right? If they are in a safe seat, they can be as blatant as possible. But if they squeak by, they have to be more careful. So I think there's going to be repercussions on that. I also think that Trump is capable of eviscerating whatever gain he might have gotten by the Senate not convicting him. Reason being is this: you have these Trump supporters who are going to vote for Trump no matter what. Even if he dies in office, they'll vote for him. You have these Trump haters who are going to vote against him no matter who is there. And you have the people in the middle. The question is, what do the people in the middle see? Do they say Trump was unfairly treated and the Democrats were mean? And no, the narrative that they get, I think, is the Senate cooked the books, didn't hear testimony, and they were unfair. And yeah, maybe it wasn't most things, but Trump, I'm not sure, might be in office. And that's why you see in the polls, Trump's approval rating is climbing, because I think it's those uncommitted, the middle voters who are not going to sit there and say, yeah, let's vote Trump again because they were kind of unfair to him on the Senate trial.
Yeah, but aside from the election, he's been profoundly emboldened recently, has he not?
Yes. Yeah. From Trump's point of view, I mean, what breaks? Because what did he do? He went after people who were compelled to testify before the House, right? If in my books, what he did to have retribution on testimony is an impeachable offense.
Well, it's witness tampering.
Yes.
Is it? Yes, and since then, witness intimidation, since the the trial. So he's been
And I think that's an
reasonably
impeachable
active.
offense.
Yes.
If I were a House of Representatives member, I would be raising that. Of course, my colleagues would say, "Are you insane? Do you want us to go through that thing again?" And this is one of the damages that perhaps this process did. If I had counseled Nancy Pelosi, I would have said, collect the articles of impeachment, let them pile up, say we got 2 here, that's fine, but we have more investigation going on. So rather than transmitting to the Senate or even voting on them, let's put them in the corner and continue the process going forward. I would not have sent forward those 2 items, because I believe that Trump's going after people that testified is an impeachable offense, which if I were a senator would vote to convict and remove.
Well, and as well now there's at least 2 separate court cases going to the U.S. Supreme Court in regards to contempt of Congress for witnesses who refused to testify during the trial. And now that's going to take about 8 months. I think there's some. I think I'm glad we were able to discuss I think we're going to need to start wrapping it up. I think there has been some damage done to the process, and I think there's been some consideration as to rules changes and to how these are done in the future. But I think we're going to have to. We're just going to have to invite you back, I think, is what's going to have to happen.
Yeah. And I don't mind the fact that she asked really great questions. I think that helped cement that stuff. But we need to consider some questions about the trial process. Question about what Alan Dershowitz said and did, right? And some questions about that from the point of view of lawyers doing what lawyers do. I think as well we have to consider that Trump right now could get away with even far more egregious stuff, because the chances of the House impeaching him in this term are really small, to almost none. So he's almost got this get out of jail free card. Now, if he gets reelected, will the new House do the same thing? And there could be more political block where the pluck can say, again, you're doing this impeachment again? And the impact could be because he's done something even more serious, maybe, and they won't touch it. Be like a person who is indicted for murder, gets acquitted, goes out and says, well, they're not going to indict me again, so let me kill some more people. Let me kill the witnesses.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and it's ostensibly it's raised the bar for all impeachable offenses across the country. And because now there's a great many politicians who feel that. So I think this has had some consequences politically that might be worth discussing. So we'll book you on again. And
I have a thing where again we talk about and have the discussion about the fallout. But I think some really great questions were raised. I think were important to go over. And the consequences will be felt. I don't think many of the consequences are positive, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think there's been some and I think internationally too. I think there's been some consequences as a result of this, and how other countries, including Iran, are. We'll get into it. We will. Why
don't we have a show?
Do you want to go to the Discord and?
Yeah, we could do that, but we have a future show on the future of impeachment to say, okay,
sounds good.
Trump has decided what's the future of impeachment look like around the world and see. By the way, great show again last night on Election Watch. And very interesting.
Don't mention people who don't vote to you. Don't mention people who don't vote to you. That's you get. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. You can see I'm quite passionate about voting. Now, I don't mind if you vote and do it differently, but This, unfortunately, if you sit there and say who's to blame, I mean, I think we are. If we were a dictatorship, we could blame the dictator. But it's
I don't think
us.
so, though, because
Well,
I don't think that the votes are informed votes if we're not living in the realm of reality. If we're being fed what is real by the same people who are asking us to vote for them, then they're just creating followers based on propaganda, and we are just followers.
Yeah.
Like I think that we're just sheep anyway.
Well, you're right. That was a big concern. I mean, I found it when I was in office extraordinarily hard to do things like say, let's make it easier for the voters to know what we're doing. Let's make it
Yeah.
easier for voters to vote. Let's make it
Yeah.
easier for people to run for office. And you know why? Because it's not partisan. Across the board, the politicians like the system they have. Why? Because it worked for them.
Yeah.
If you're an office
Yeah.
holder, you tend to like the system because you won. And if you come there and say, let's make it easier for opposition to find out what you're doing, I can't have that, right?
And you can
Let's make it easier for people to
do
run
a
for
number of
office.
right, right. And you can do a number of horrible things and just tell the public, no, I didn't. And they'll believe you and reelect you because you didn't, and everybody else lied about you, and it's emboldening. And yeah,
Yep.
so like I don't think we
Yep.
have a transparent access to what's the difference between what's being said and what's happening. And the process is overly complicated. I think it does work in their favor that like an average person that's new to the process like me, I sometimes, don't have access to understand the process of what's happening, let alone vote accordingly. And the other thing is voting on which options, the options that are given have to go through a process of political motivations. That
We definitely
the
need to
fact that they're
improve.
there,
I
it
mean,
means they have to have, yeah, the fact that they're there to be voted on, the options that we have, there are, there's funding involved and there's backings and there's, political favors and all those things. So it's kind of, the options themselves aren't up to us either. And so that's
I
really,
wish more voters were asking the kind of questions you're asking. I had a simple, I tried to get a simple rule change, which said, if you're voting on something where you have a financial interest, you have to, prior to casting your vote, say, I have this financial interest for this bill and I'm voting yes. Right? Require you to say, if you're going to vote on something where you have ability to personally gain, you have to declare that before casting your vote. And you know why it was rejected?
well, but that would require admitting that that's possible.
It was rejected because they say that the meeting would go too long.
Ooh.
They would spend too much time having to declare all these vested interests. Like say, I got this campaign contribution. My business does this. And they say the meeting would last too long. And that's why it was rejected. So,
yeah. So one more, before we go, one more thing. I voted yesterday for the primaries, and
thank you.
the local, and I'm in Texas, and the local state questions of like bills that they wanted to ask to be passed were framed in a way, they were worded in a way that was saying, do you think people have the right to blah blah blah? It didn't say this is the bill and this is what it's arguing for. It said, do you think people have the right to bear arms? Do you think people have the right to a fair judicial system? Do you think people have the right to be free from hate crimes and things like that? And like, I was like, why am I being asked this? What is this, a bill? Is it just a public forum question to get our opinions? What is it? And I, do you know what that is? Like, it's, because that's frightening. They don't tell you what you're voting on.
The process is called the orphan kittened process. It comes from long ago, there was a case where there was a bill And the advertising around this bill was a guy held up a kitten going mew, and it said, "Unless you vote for this bill, this kitten dies.
Right.
You'll be killing this kitten." And that was his thing about. Now it was really about funding for animal control and blah blah blah, that sort of thing. But he turned it into this thing, and that meme, which is, I think that was like that was done in the 60s or so. It's been around for a while. Unfortunately, that's what happens is if the legislature is forced to give something to the people, it'll be something in the form of, do you vote to uphold motherhood, apple pie, God, country, blah, 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 or are you
Right.
a blasphemous sinner, communist, blah, 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 pinko, something like that.
Right.
They do it in such polarizing things when it may actually be, first of all, something the legislature should decide. And they're too cowardly to do it themselves.
No, but can you answer that question though? Like, were those bills that I was answering? Or not bills,
well,
but whatever it is. Whatever it is. I'm just saying. So we usually vote on like the persons in office, and we also vote on certain, I don't know what you call them, mandates for the state itself.
Measures. And there are a variety of things. They can have advisory measures where they ask the poll voters, do you want this to happen? And the voters say yes,
Right.
until they then do the legislation to do it done. So there's
Like
advisory things where
they
they're
had a
not
vote on
binding.
whether the stadium should be changed in Texas. The Cowboy Stadium, voting whether we should have the stadium or not. So what were
those are
what I
advisory.
answered?
Yeah.
Yeah. What I answered, was that a question for a survey, or was that something that I voted for or against?
There are mixtures, because I don't know the actual bill, but there's some things where all it is the public is advising the legislature on what they want to have happen. There's some things where they're asking the public to actually pass a bill. There's some things where they might actually be amending even the state's constitution, right? There can be everything from advisory, and the legislature can ignore the advice, to an actual bill which the legislature can amend and blah blah, to something which gets passed and the legislature can't touch it, to something even in the Constitution. There can be a whole range of stuff, from shall we have a stadium, and if the people say no, they can still ignore it, or yes, they can ignore it, right? It's advisory, to shall we change the Constitution to do such and such, right? Those are, you have a range, and so some things are basically under an advisory measure. It could be a legislative bill. It could be a process that the legislature can't override, to a process where they could override if they have like a 2/3 majority, to is a constitutional. And you have to look at it. There can be essentially advisory vote, legislative vote, an initiative, or a constitutional amendment. It can be anywhere in between.
Well, I guess I'll just have to look online what those were, because I was in there, and you're stuck in there. You can't like ask somebody, and you can't look it up on your phone. You can't, you know what I mean? Like, you're stuck there, and you didn't know this was going to be asked, but you don't know what you're saying yes to or no to, and that's really fucking scary.
And it's a bad legislation for the legislature to pass off to the people, saying, shall trucks be required to have air pressure tires exceeding blah, 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 blah. How do you know, right? That's what the legislature is supposed to do, and they'll have committee hearings, and people who are experts in trucking discuss stuff. And sometimes the legislature
but this wasn't even,
are cowards.
Yeah.
And pass it off to the people and say, well, it's not our fault. Right?
But this wasn't even like, we're asking you, should this happen or should this happen? It was, do you think people have the right to blah, blah, blah? Like, that was literally all it said. And it did not tell you what that was for, what that was referring to. And that's really scary. I don't know if that's more in Texas than anywhere else, because Texas is fucking awful. But like, Jesus, what?
Yeah, and in other states where they'll have a voter pamphlet where the arguments for will be presented, the arguments against will be presented. They even have a chance to rebut, and you can see the actual text.
That would be great.
But understand the other side of the coin is, I had 95 pages of my voter pamphlet to go through to determine the various bills. Things I was voting
Some of them
for,
I would have tried to figure it out.
But yes, you need to know, shall truth be reign supreme? It's like,
no,
what's that about, right?
I don't like politics.
So
I'm not coming back.
I think
Jesus.
I think that legislatures should be more required to make the hard votes rather than pass it off to the people. Because again, you have cowardly acts where they say, "Well, we'll let the people decide," and then wash your hands of it, right? And you're right. Is that democracy? If you're actually a vote on something and you have no idea what you're doing,
it's not.
The problem is that in our case, we had like 2 judicial appointments, right, where the judge has been appointed and people are asked to confirm the appointment. People saying, "How do I know what this judge is? Is this good? Is this bad? What happens, right?" So I have to do the hard thing of researching the person's case history, looking at the and making a determination, and it's hard, right? So sometimes democracy, as you see, doesn't serve the people when you actually are asked to vote. And ask yourself, do you think that people made an informed decision on that measure?
No.
So do you think that democracy was served by having that thing go forward? By the way, did it pass?
I don't
know.
You
know if it passed or not?
I don't know what it was to fucking begin with. I'm sorry. I'm getting really mad.
Yeah, but do me a favor. Do me a favor.
This is why I don't talk about politics on YouTube.
Do me a favor. Do some research. Determine whether it passed or not, and let me know. I'm curious.
I don't know where to look though. Where do you look? Is that a state? I think it's a state thing. So maybe like Texas.gov or something. I would ask
the Secretary of State for the state of Texas are usually in the states are the ones that run the election process. Either Secretary of State
that guy.
or and online look up Secretary of State or look up State of Texas election returns.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and
that's election returns.
State of Texas election return. March 2020.
For the viewers, just comment down below if this was your experience in your local election. I know that our viewers are from all over the place, so if you are a U.S. Citizen and if you voted, which better have, even though we all agree that it doesn't matter anyway.
and
even though we agree that like you have to vote, but you also have to be an informed voter, which is a lot. So, there's that.
Takes time, right?
Yeah.
My area,
and you have to know what to look for and what to ask.
Unfortunately, I influence a number of votes where there are hundreds of people, I'm not making this up, who privately message me saying, "What do you think I should do?" and blah, blah, and blah. And I'm always hesitant to say, "Do this." That's what they want to say. Tell me how to vote. And I'm like, "Ning." So I try to do as I say, I am endorsing Measure G because blah. If you disagree, vote no. Right? I try to give them at least something or other. And sometimes I sit there, like for example, with a primary, I didn't declare who I was endorsing. And by the way, sometimes I endorse and then hear considerations and then change my mind in the voting booths too. So just because I endorse doesn't mean I vote that way. But that's a hard thing.
Yeah, I think we need to. We're actually really quite past the mark.
We are way past.
So what we'll do?
Leave a comment in the bottom of like what your experience was with that, and continue the debate, and we will try to include those things in the next discussion.
Let's talk about the future of impeachment. At another time.
Thanks again for your. There's a million things to have you on for, and we still got to have you on for South Park. Like I said, we're going to have a South Park episode with you, because I don't think anyone has any clue, and nobody has any clue. So we'll discuss that, and we will
Don't be a Cartman.
Definitely have you back again. We've got a Stitch in Time, hopefully tomorrow. It depends on whether or not Mikey is going to be up for it. And then Godless Mom next week to discuss prison reform. Was there anything else, Courtney, that you wanted to say before we head out?
Oh, Landon, where can we find you? Where can the viewers find you?
I have a Twitter following LANDONNOLL. Landon Knoll, at Landon Knoll is there. My thing is almost no politics. It's more like sciencey stuff or art, right? So you get art and science in my Twitter feed.
Okay.
Because that's kind of the. I do have other people that I recommend. I encourage you. There's two comedians I encourage you to consider. One is Pimp Monk. One is Isaac Butterfield. Two people I support in the comedy area. I also ask you to consider being a patron of this show and to like and subscribe and all that cool stuff. Another group I would ask you to consider is Milwaukee Atheists. Or another group of people that do some very interesting stuff there. Say I'm on Twitter, and of course, if you're in astronomy and so forth, you can see stuff that I do in the astronomy community. But those are more they're not as exciting as impeachment. So in some respects, but other people,
and for me, I can be found on Atheist Edge most days. And on Here in Time, I'm so glad that I've been accepted as the co-host.
And congratulations!
So I really appreciate it. And this was quite a premiere of my being the co-host of like the subject I know the least about and seem the least competent in.
Nick, I think she did.
Thank you for that, guys.
She asked a lot of very good questions. Those were spectacular questions.
I represent the uninformed public. That's what I represent. I think it's important to like put it down in layman's terms and get clear questions and answers of like, what are we dealing with? What is this animal? So I'm glad that I was able to do that and represent everyone else who doesn't know most things about the political process and how this all works. And I will be, I'm saying this for the first time on this episode. I will officially be at Faithless Forum, so I will be meeting the in time
I think you did a marvelous job of being an informed person representing those who might not be as informed. The other thing I would encourage you to do at some time is Milwaukee Atheists have their Atheist Sunday School where they go and sit and actually read the Bible. And I think you would be a really good person to come on and they give you a chapter to read and they have all this discussion and so forth. Check them out because I think that you think you'd like them as well. So thanks again, folks. Again, I try to be as neutral as possible. If I strayed into lack of neutrality, I apologize. I was trying to give both sides of the coin, and that sometimes ticks people off.
I think you did a good job of that. Go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you hopefully tomorrow, and if not, seeing you guys on Tuesday for prison reform. Thank you all for joining us.